Hey folks, my name is Karthik Gaekwad, doing a quick talk today at the Oracle booth at KubeCon. So I wanted to talk quickly about like the cluster ecosystem that we have going on. You know, we're at a pretty big conference, a lot of interesting things going on in this ecosystem. But it wasn't like this a couple years ago when initially we started talking about Kubernetes. The hardest thing about doing Kubernetes was actually installing it. And you would, once you got past the installation step, you had like your Kubernetes cluster, and that cluster would help you do all of the different things. Today cluster creation is not necessarily like a hard problem, but back in the day, the creation of the cluster, that was kind of painful. And then once you had your cluster, you just kept adding nodes to it and making one big cluster. But today, with the evolution of Kubernetes in general, cluster creation has become an easy problem. Most of the cloud vendors have managed Kubernetes services like Oracle has, Oracle Kubernetes Engine, but there's also other ways, like you can use kops or kubeadm or whatever. There's been a lot of evolution in those tools. The big difference that we see today is instead of having one big cluster for your whole organization to do different pieces, we have many smaller clusters that can kind of federate teams to perform all the different tasks that they have. So small clusters are kind of king is the picture of what we're painting today. But the problem is when you have a bunch of tooling associated with this, it's a little bit more painful to work in a smaller cluster world. So I was going to cover some stuff that I've used over time and some stuff that I've learned from folks in the industry like Mickey. He taught me a couple of things about Kubernetes, and I wanted to talk about that because I think it's really helpful from a developer perspective. So we're going to talk about, from a development perspective, kubectx or kubecontext. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I'm going to call it kubectx. There's also kubeends. There's a thing called kind. Those things are important from a development point of view. So as a developer, you're kind of wanting to do productive sort of things. And from a DevOps perspective, I'm going to cover a couple of things called Sonoboy and kubebench. These are some things that we use internally inside Oracle for Oracle Cloud. And so I'll talk through those as well. So this is not going to be like a PowerPoint. So I just have like 4 slides. And we're on slide number 3, but kubectx is an easy way to switch between clusters. And it's an open source GitHub project, the link's on there. And so let's actually go to the command line for this. I'm gonna type one hand, it's gonna be interesting. kubectx, I'm just gonna type that. And basically what this gives me is like a visual representation of the different clusters that I have. You don't have to use this, but the other way to kind of use this is some folks kind of like using Docker itself. So Docker has Kubernetes and it shows you all the different Kubernetes that you have installed. But kubecontext is a quick way that you can do that from the command line. So I can do a kubectl. So I can do like a kubectx, a kubectl, go back to my command thing. I'll do a config view, so I'm not like messing with y'all. Don't copy this stuff, but basically, you notice that this is running like a cluster in one of the servers, so this is running in the cloud. But I'm going to do a kubecontext, and I'm going to change the context from my Docker to desktop. And it says, switch context to Docker for desktop. So if I do a kubeconfig, config view, I'll make this a little bit smaller. Actually, maybe not. But when I start looking at that, do config view again. You see that's changed to Docker user for desktop, and then also in terms of the actual context. You see it says, like the cluster, Docker for desktop, blah, blah, blah. So it's a quick way to kind of change between different scenarios. So that's one tool we kind of use a lot. The other one that Mickey actually told me about was kubeends. And this is something similar. Like kubeends is similar to kubecontext, but it's more for namespaces, because a lot of times you have different namespaces with Kubernetes. So if I go back and do a kubeends, it'll kind of basically tell you all the different namespaces that I have running inside of my cluster. I'm actually going to switch back to my kube. I'm going to switch my cluster back to my context in the cloud because I have more things in there. And now I'm going to do kubeEnds, and this will kind of give me like the different namespaces that I have running inside of my context for that. You'll notice the highlighted one is the one that we're actually kind of sitting on, so that's kind of like a good visual representation of what namespace you want to use. The reason this is important is because it's really, when you're using kubectl, you don't have to do the -n for the namespace, and so it's a quick little shortcut. Helps a lot with productivity when you're doing this on like a minute-to-minute basis when you're trying to debug stuff. Awesome. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is called kind. This is Kubernetes and Docker. There's many ways that we can use Kubernetes from a local development perspective. There's initially a lot of folks used to install Kubernetes locally with Minikube. That was like the first big tool. Then kind of Docker came out with Docker running inside of Kubernetes. And kind is kind of one of those tools as well that you can use. So you can do development with Docker, or development with Docker and Kubernetes running inside of Docker. I know it sounds really crazy, but like the node runs inside of Docker as well. And ironically, I found out about this because we use this in the Kubernetes world to test Kubernetes. So that's the primary use case for this. But I've started to hear like developers also use this from a development perspective too. I tried to install, but not everything goes great, right? So I tried to install this and run this on my machine, and I have like an archaic version of Go. So I think I have like Go 110, and I think Go 112 is like the latest version out right now. So when I tried to install kind on my machine with Kubernetes 112 and Go 110, it's like it starts to create context and then dies. So I need to debug why kind doesn't work on my box, but I tried it in a VM and it works pretty well if you have like all of the latest versions of everything. It's a little bit different from Minikube and Kubernetes or Docker for Kubernetes, but still a pretty good tool. Awesome. So let's move on to more of a DevOps perspective. So there's this thing called Sonobuoy. Sonobuoy is, and I think this name has changed. I don't remember the new name, but it's from the folks at Heptio who are now VMware. Sonobuoy is basically a scanner. So like you can visit the scanner and it helps you basically it runs through all of the Kubernetes conformance tests that you can run through. And this is important because there are many vendors that have Kubernetes, and you want to have like a certified version of Kubernetes so that when you run kubectl get pods or kubectl get deployments on Oracle Cloud, that same command should work on IBM Cloud or like on your local Kubernetes as well. And so conformance testing actually runs through a set of tests that help you understand whether like all of those test paths that are actually conforming to like a primary Kubernetes from a primary Kubernetes perspective. And once your test pass, you can actually go file a PR against Kubernetes and have a like certified Kubernetes cluster. So like Oracle Cloud or OCI, the Oracle Kubernetes engine for OCI, as well as the version that we have on Oracle Linux are both certified. I'll quickly kind of show you what this looks like from a test perspective, but be forewarned, if you're not a developer, you're gonna like barf at this because there's gonna be a lot of output. So we'll do a kubectl. Actually, I made a special thing here, so it's a little bit bigger. I'll do a get pods real quick. And so, it looks like my Sonobuoy actually errored. So if I do kubectl, I can do a logs on the actual endpoints, and and I can actually look at the logs to kind of see the output of all these things. kubectl, logs, Sonobuoy. I don't know what container this is running on, but I can kind of see that. -c kube Sonobuoy. And this kind of tells you, hey, like this is all the different things that's run. So these tests take about an hour and a half to kind of finish. So I ran this beforehand. So if I end up like looking at this specific test folder directory, it's a tar file, but I can actually look at this to get the output of all the conformance testing. Like I said, the importance of this is once you take a look at the files, if you have test failures and things like that, your Kubernetes distro might not have been built correctly. So things you want to go and check out. All right, so last but not least, I also wanted to talk about a tool that I kind of like from a bench perspective. So a lot of times we have DevOps folks installing Kubernetes, and so when you install Kubernetes and run it, you kind of want to be able to know whether you did things correctly. Sonaboy is a great way, but it takes over an hour to actually run all those tests, and it doesn't really work well from a CI/CD kind of perspective. You still want to run it, but you might want a quick check of, hey, did this cluster actually install right? KubeBench is a great example of this open source project from Aqua Security, and you can actually run this. So I ran this against my local cluster that I had with Docker. So let's take a look at the output for that. So first I want to make sure that my context is right. So I ran it on my Docker for desktop. So I'm going to switch it to that. So I switched context, that's great. kubectl, get pods. You'll notice that I ran KubeBench against one of my nodes. So let's take a look at the output of that. So I'll clear my screen. I'll do kubectl logs. And this basically just outputs a bunch of logs, and in here it goes through your security configuration for your actual nodes. So when you run this against your cluster, you'll either run it against your API server, or you can run against your nodes, or you can do against both. So in this case, I ran against my node that's on my local box, and so you'll notice that I have a lot of failures in here. Like it says, I had a privilege. I have allowed privilege set to true or set to false. Anonymous auth is also set to false. A bunch of things that you kind of want to improve or harden your Kubernetes images. So a bunch of things over there that you want to kind of follow best practices from a security and from a DevOps perspective. So it just gives you a quick view of different things that you've done well, different things you've done wrong. So it gives folks at least a baseline of what you want to be doing. The rest of this, one of the things I like about it is that it gives you remediations. So for 2.1.1, which I failed on, which was allow privilege argument to be set false, it tells you what that actually means, and then how you can actually correct that. So when you build a cluster the first time, you might not even understand what any of this stuff is. So it gives you some baseline on, hey, here are some things that you should take care of, or here are some things you should address up front. So a quick way to go about that and to do that. So yeah, that's I basically wanted to touch on a bunch of different things with respect to tooling and stuff. So thank you.